Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Guerrilla Poker, and today I'm going to be covering some of the hands that were played in the second part of the Heads Up Challenge between Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu. This is an exciting grudge match. There's lots of side action and big side bets and cross-booking going on. They played one time live. This is the first online time that they've played, and we're just going to go through some hands, talk a bit about strategy, and give you guys a brief look at what went down in the second match. What I'm gonna do is we're gonna jump around because I don't want to wait with you guys while they're tanking pre-flop and all that stuff. So we're gonna jump around sometimes to the middle of hands or replay them a bit fast and just talk about what happened. So in this hand, Daniel Negreanu 3-bet. He got the 6-4 deuce two-tone board, which is the kind of board where you have to be a bit careful. A lot of your 3-bets miss, so you can't go ahead and bet all your good hands. He made a fairly large c-bet, 75%, which got called by Doug, and already the pot was 20,000 at this point in a hand. Daniel then checked the turn. Doug bet 1/3 pot. Now, I want to mention that this is a really technically good bet size by Doug. When people make big bets and then check, they're generally just giving up a lot, so there's no need to go for big bets in Doug's shoes. This is kind of a let's shake the tree bet to make Daniel fold hands like Queen 9 of clubs or stuff like that. It's just giving up. So small bet by Doug makes a lot of sense. And Daniel goes for a check raise all in. I think a very good play by Daniel in terms of strategy. There are a lot of players who, when they play heads up, they go, you know, big bet, and then check is giving up, and they keep barreling draws and good hands. And it's very, very important to mix in some check raises in there. If you don't do that, your opponent wins the pot every time he stabs, and that's obviously not good for you. Even with a hand like Queen 9 of clubs, you still have a chance to win the pot, so you don't want to let Doug just take it away every single time. So at this point, I would say, you know, play looks technically fine by both, and I'm impressed to see Daniel Negreanu go for this check raise all in. Doug calls, the cards get turned face up. Daniel has a flush draw, which is one of the hands that makes sense to bluff with in this way, and Doug just has 2 pair. So pretty much the hand's a cooler, but shows you good things about Daniel's strategy and approach to this match. Okay, so second hand is the hand on the right. Daniel 3-bet pre-flop and fired a small continuation bet on an 8-9-10 monotone board. This is a board that's much better for Doug's range due to the presence of hands like Queen Jack offsuit in his range that Daniel is going to have a lot less of. So a board where most people play very, very passively as the 3-better and check a lot, but Daniel went for a flop bet, big turn bet here on the King of Diamonds that Doug is going to call, and we'll go ahead to the river. River is a complete brick. Daniel goes all in and gets snap called by Doug. Daniel with 3 of a kind pocket 9s, Doug with Jack 7 for the straight. Again, similar to the previous hand, this hand is played well by both players. There's absolutely nothing else you can do other than get all the money in, and it would have gone in one way or the other, no matter how each player played. So just so far, 2 coolers in Doug's favor. I bet he was pretty happy to see Daniel had pocket 9s and auto flush here. Next hand is here on the left. We see that Doug Polk 3-bet, Daniel Negreanu goes for a 4-bet in position. They're about 140 big blinds deep. Doug goes all in. Negreanu gonna snap call with pocket 10s versus pocket queens. Again, just a cooler. I think both hands are fine to stack off. 10s definitely a bit looser than queens for 140 deep, but I'm sure it's perfectly fine. So cooler count is 3 for Doug, 0 for Negreanu in the hands we've covered so far. Next hand we're gonna cover is on the right. 3-bet by Daniel, big 4-bet by Doug. These guys are now more like 117 big blinds deep. Daniel goes all in, and we have ace queen against pocket queens. For yet another cooler, I think in this spot, generally some people would flat the 4-bet with ace queen off some of the time, but Doug made a pretty big 4-bet, and that makes flatting less attractive. So I think again pretty much a cooler any way you look at it, and Doug is definitely running well in this match so far. Next hand is on this table with deuce 4 6 8 king. This is a single raised pot. Daniel Negreanu bet big bet on the flop, big bet on the turn, and is now going for another 75% bet on the river on this run out. In terms of the range that I'd expect him to show up with, I think that the way the board ran out, he could definitely do this with something as weak as even ace-8, maybe even weaker than ace-8. Certainly pocket nines is strong enough, and you know you can go for these triple barrels quite wide, and of course a million bluffs to choose from with a board being so many low disconnected cards. Doug goes for the snap call, and here they both turn up fairly interesting hands. So let's start with Daniel. Daniel bet flop with a gut shot, barrel the turn with an open ender, and then on the king river, I think that his choice to bet with queen 5 is actually quite questionable. Because the board is so low, queen high is actually fairly high in Daniel's range, and I would think that he could probably get away with actually checking this hand back on the river, and that the hand is strong enough to win a showdown a decent amount of the time. Doug is going to show up here with some jack high flush draws and some 10 high flush draws, and 5 of spades, 10-9 of spades, bunch of hands like that, and you don't want to bluff all the way down to queen 5. There are so many other hands that you're bluffing with. Having a spade is also of course not good. So I would say this bluff by Daniel on the river is probably a bit technically sloppy and not the best hand choice for bluffing, and he's, if I had to guess, bluffing too much on this river if he's bluffing up to queen 5. Doug, on the other hand, also have some criticism for his play in this hand. I think that given how wide Daniel is probably meant to value bet this river, king 8 on the river has to be a check raise and not a check call. It's true that there are multiple 2-card straights on the board, but A, Daniel might have bet bigger than 75% with them, and B, there are just so many other hands that you beat. I feel like king 8 just has to be a check raise. So in my eyes, a bit of a mistake by both. Maybe I'm wrong, I haven't checked this in any simulation, but intuitively both plays feel a bit sloppy. Our next hand is on a 9-8-3 board with a king that brings in a flush coming in on the turn. Daniel c-bet for 75% flop on the flop, followed through for another big bet on the turn. I will say king of clubs turn, not the best turn for a polarized c-betting range. You would much rather have something bricky like a deuce, where you can keep piling money in with something like pocket tens. But Daniel's certainly going to have hands that are strong enough to keep betting, so he bets 75% pot on the turn. Skip ahead, gets called, jack of hearts river, makes another 75% bet, and we're seeing him use this sizing quite a lot so far. Here Doug calls, and they show up with queen of clubs 4 for Daniel and jack of diamonds 10 of clubs for Doug. And I will say that if you look at each hand separately, Daniel's hand seems perfectly played. You know, bet flop, barrel when you turn the flush draw, bluff on the river with the queen that's a nice blocker, blocking the straight, blocking the flush, hand seems perfectly fine. Doug, you know, called flop, you could sometimes check raise this type of hand. Called turn, you could also sometimes check raise, but calling is fine. And this hand, in a way, if you guys remember the previous hand where I said Daniel should be checking back queen high on the river, this kind of shows this a similar scenario, where here, had the river been not a jack but something like an ace or a deuce, it could have gone check check and Daniel would actually have won with queen 4 high. And this is certainly a dynamic that happens in heads up a lot more than it does in other variants, and for that reason you really want to select your bluffs from the lower card region in your range. And there's a very big difference, and high cards just show down and win sometimes. It's a real thing, and it does actually happen, just like it would almost have certainly happened in this hand had the river been a brick and Daniel not bet the river. He would just have won with queen high. Okay, we'll now look at this hand on the left. Daniel 3-bet pre-flop, made a fairly small flop c-bet. he made a fairly small turn c-bet, and then he got the queen of clubs river and went suddenly for a bigger 75% pot-sized bet. And I feel like this hand is very, very interesting. Daniel triple-barreled, but the way the board ran out, all the draws in Daniel's range are going to get there on the river. The flush got there, all the gut shots got there except for something like 3-5, which is not very often in Daniel's range. And in a way, if Daniel is just bluffing draws, it's almost impossible to come up with a bluff on the river. You'd have to bluff something like a king-jack, like just turn it into a bluff, or a queen-10, turn it into a bluff. It's a pretty crazy spot, especially if you're barreling in a kind of intuitive way and haven't put in a lot of work. And if I were in Doug's shoes, I'd be very, very hesitant calling this bet because of that reason. Daniel would have to be very, very sharp and on point with his game to find bluffs here. And if you guys try to think about it, it's really tough to find the bluffs here. Try to think which hands you guys would be bluffing here after betting the turn, getting to the river. It's really not that easy on this kind of run out. Yeah, what happens is Doug calls, Daniel shows king high flush, which, like I said, one of the draws coming in. Doug mucks, and maybe he had an ace. If you have an ace, it's a bit tough to fold because you might be chopping. But if not, I would hope that he could have found a fold with something like, you know, Jack 10 with a 10 of clubs, or Queen 10 with a Queen 10 of clubs. I feel like those hands should be, you know, raising or folding, but probably not a very good spot to call. Okay, now we're gonna have one of the more interesting and bigger pots in the session. Doug 3-bets, a bit small, they are fairly deep. Daniel calls, and we get an 8-8-5 rainbow board. Now, in terms of boards, one of the things you need to realize in heads up is that it's fine to lose if you have an overpair and the other guy has 3 of a kind. You just kind of have to live with it. In the words of Doyle Brunson, if he's got it, he's got it. You know, I'm not getting away from this hand. And certainly on the turn 8, Doug should be going for stacks very, very wide, and he makes a pot-sized bet, certainly indicating that that's what he's doing, right? Like we'd expect. I don't know where the threshold is, if it's 7s or 9s or 10s, but certainly very, very wide, going for value on the 8-8-8-5 board. We get the 9 of diamonds river. Doesn't really change very much about the board. And Doug goes all in. About the size of the pot, gets called by Daniel with 9-7. And let's talk about what happened in this hand. Like I said, I think maybe the biggest spot of the session. So Doug 3-bets aces, goes bet, bet, shove. Certainly a fine way to play aces. You could mix in a check on any of the streets, but you certainly don't have to, and you don't want to always be doing that. So this is a fine way to play aces. The more questionable play in this hand is Daniel's turn call with 9-7. Usually when you have a gut shot on this kind of board, you kind of want to call the turn. It's a nice hand to call. You can't call only having pairs. But because the board ran out in a unique way, where it's 8-8-8, I feel that rather than have something like 9-7 or 6-7, Daniel would do a lot better just calling hands like King-Jack, Ace-10, King-Queen, where he's actually drawing to high pairs, to high boats, let's say, and doesn't need to bluff if Doug checks to him on the river. So in my eyes, this turn call with 9-7 was a bit too loose. Usually you're calling to hit your gut shot and win, but here, if Daniel hits his gut shot, he's still losing to all of Doug's value bets. I think the turn call is loose and a poor hand selection, but very connected to this very unique board. And usually calling this type of hand, had the turn been a deuce or something like that, would be perfectly fine. River call by Daniel, you know, he kind of has to call the river. This is very, very high up in his range. Doug could potentially be value betting the same hand, sick as that sounds. So I think, you know, no question about the river, no question about the flop, no question about pre-flop, but I think the turn call here was probably a bit too loose. Okay, so for our last hand, we have the hand on the left. This is not actually a very, very big pot. I'll walk you guys through the action just after we get to see Doug's river raise. It's gonna be in a second. Okay, so what happens here is flop comes queen 10-5 two-tone in a single raise pot. Doug is the aggressor. A very good board for him with the 2 broadways. He goes for a third pot c-bet, usually indicating that he's betting very, very, very wide. Daniel calls, turn 7 and river 7. And this is a bit of a unique run out, and it strongly favors Doug, because after his flop bet, Daniel's not going to have many 7s, but Doug certainly can have any 7 in his range with bet flop, check back turn, and make 3 of a kind on the river. So when the turn card pairs on the river, it's one of those rare runouts where out of position player can't bluff too much, he can't value bet too big, he's just a bit handcuffed. And that's important to keep in mind, because trip 7s are a thing that Doug's going to have a lot more than Daniel, let's say. So here then Daniel makes a 75% bet, which I assume is somewhere around, you know, you need a decent queen to do this, or better, where better would mostly be a flush. Gets raised by Doug. Doug's saying that he has either 3 of a kind or a flush. And Daniel goes into the tank and calls with a jack high flush. Doug has a7 for 3 of a kind top kicker. I think the hand by Daniel, you could consider throwing a 3-bet in there on the river. I wouldn't be sure if the hand is strong enough or not, but intuitively I feel like it is. Doug's probably raising a decent amount of his 3 of a kinds. Jack high flush is a pretty strong hand, but it's certainly close. It's certainly close. And one of the things you have to remember is that even though the board is paired as Daniel, you're not really scared of boats, because Doug would have bet all his 2-pair or better on a turn. You're really only scared of king high flush and ace high flush. You have basically the third nuts in a pot that's not that big, and I think Daniel could have gone for the 3-bet, but it's certainly close, and I don't blame him for just calling. So that's gonna end the hand analysis of the first match. The results were that Doug was up a bit over $200,000, a bit more than 5 buy-ins. I think looking at the big pots generally will tell you only part of the story. Certainly it looks like Doug has run a lot better than Daniel in these, but heads up is often very much determined by all the small pots that happen in between, where people steal a big blind here and a big blind there. And that's not really something that we can cover in these kind of recaps. If you guys would like me to do more of these, there is an option to do them on Twitch. I'm also happy to receive any specific hands that you want me to talk about from any challenge and just talk about those. Either way, hope you guys enjoyed the video and the recap. I'll certainly keep following the challenge. I think it's really exciting and really fun, and a really great thing that Daniel and Doug are doing for the poker community. Even if that might not be their main incentive, there might be a bit of grudge match incentive going on. So if you like the video, like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.